We need to stop talking about change. I know it's exciting, I know it's interesting to find new things constantly, and I know the media with their ever-accelerating coverage, the plethora of channels, all the things distracting us every second of the waking day mean that we want to find something new. But ultimately, what I want to talk about today is that actually we need to stop looking for the new and try and sometimes take stock and remind ourselves that a lot of change that we think is happening isn't really, and that there are a number of things that just don't change. We're constantly looking for new needs and ways of fulfilling them, but actually there are no new needs. Human beings have the same bodies, eat the same stuff, fall in love, marry, go to work, die. Our needs fundamentally don't change that much. And actually, in terms of our behaviour, most of our behaviour defaults to not changing, to not trying something new. And whether it's politics, whether it's how we treat our pensions, what we do about our electricity and gas suppliers, or indeed the banks that we stay with. I'm still with the same bank that gave me a T-shirt in the 1980s, and I've never bothered to change, despite, I think, being able to save thousands of pounds over the course of my life by doing so, because I, like everybody else, am subject to the status quo bias, and that is to stick with what you know. And it's a really powerful human emotion, and we sometimes, I think, forget that. And generally, when we're spotting patterns, when we're looking for new things, when we see change happening, very often our perceptions are just simply wrong. We can't see the wood or the forest because we're too busy looking at the trees. So if you take the issue of trust, one of the things that you can find if you go online will be endless articles about how trust is in decline. Americans are less trusting than ever before. Social media companies are losing public trust. Charities are losing trust. The public don't trust politicians. We don't trust the news anymore. We don't trust the British public. Fake doctors are more common than you realise. You name it. British public don't trust the government anymore. But let's look at the data. We've been asking about how much people trust different professions in Britain since the 1980s. And this is the data in terms of how many people trust politicians to tell the truth. As you can see, it's barely changed. All of those headlines, it's always been terrible. People never like politicians. And sometimes our worry about something, what seems to be a new thing, is just a worry about an old thing. So there is no recent pattern of a decline in trust that's actually behind the challenges in our politics. Some of them are acute, but they're not new. And we should stop always looking for newness in everything. And so many of us do feel overwhelmed all over the world. We feel that the world is changing too fast. In Britain, we're actually relatively calm. Only 6 out of 10 of us think that the world's changing too fast, compared to 86% in China, or in Mexico, 92%. But actually, the evidence is that it might not be changing quite as much as we think. We're also very nostalgic about the past. If you look at this chart, you can see that since the end of the last century, it's grown from 36% to around half of us saying that they want the country to be the way it used to be. But of course, let's just cut back a little way. And I think this is one of the things, when we spot a trend like that, it seems to have gone up, go and find some older data from a different question or something else from before. And when I look back, actually, you find suddenly, back in 1994, just as many people as now wanted the country to be the way it used to be. Nostalgia is basically the British condition. While we can see that people's attitudes are gently shifting, this is the proportion of people who say that we're heading for environmental disaster if we don't change things, and we can see that even in the year of the pandemic, more people globally are waking up to the threats of climate change. Nevertheless, when you start to look at people's actual behaviour when they're buying something in a shop, what happens? Well, actually, the thing that always happened. Is it good value for money? So why did you choose that product? What was most important? You're very worried about the environment. Eco-friendly packaging? Well, yeah, but was it cheaper? Was it good value? And so we need, I think, to be careful about believing that everything is changing and that everything is going to be new, particularly after the pandemic. It's certainly true that the disease has forced a lot of change on us. And so we can see massive changes. In retail, we've seen this more growth in e-commerce in the last 6 months than in the previous 6 years. The same in e-banking. And those changes, I think, are likely to stick. But it's not new. We're already banking online. We're already using the internet. We're already watching streaming movies. We've just done more of it because of the pandemic. Underneath it all, apart from our changed behaviours, our values haven't changed. And they change much more slowly. And we're not talking here about sort of just lightweight opinions about things you haven't thought about, but about those things about how you should live your life. Is the death penalty right? And those sorts of things, even with a massive shock like COVID-19, those sorts of things change much more slowly. So, you have to remember that in research, we're measuring opinions, and those are often like froth, not particularly considered. The surface of the sea, it bounces around. What did you think of that song last night? What did you think of the Bake Off finals? These are fairly shallow views. Attitudes are a bit deeper. We can measure those as well. Perhaps how do you feel about the government of the day? But our values, what do you think about the death penalty? What do you think about gay marriage? Should people have children? Those things change much, much more slowly, and it will take much more than a year of a pandemic to change those. Now, some of these values are more important than others. They're more salient. They do change over time, but not that quickly. And I think sometimes our focus on endless change, the jogging up and down of opinion, is distracting us from what's really going on. So if you look at Britain, I think what's interesting is that, we looked at some data recently. We went back to the last century and we said, okay, well, let's look back to before the internet. What did people feel then about a number of things? So there's the number of people online in Britain. It's gone from 13% in 1999, now at 93%. There's the proportion of people who fear that technical progress is destroying our lives. Didn't really change. There's the proportion of people who said they felt overwhelmed by all this stuff, all these screens. Well, it wasn't like that in 1999. It is today. Same proportion want to slow down their lives. Being a boss, the chief executive of Ipsos MORI will make you happy. Well, probably for most people it didn't in 1999. It certainly wouldn't in 2019. Or indeed that we just need to rely on our own principles and nobody else. Hasn't really changed. And then I thought, well, maybe the pandemic did change everything. Maybe we saw some fundamental reappraisal of all of those things. So we looked again, and more people were online, forced to go there to get their shopping. But actually on everything else, no statistically significant difference. And I think overall what I'd say is that, first of all, our behaviour has changed, but our values haven't. Our constant focus on the new and the looking for patterns of change is sometimes obliviating us to these longer-term trends. COVID-19 has not changed everything. It has not changed our values, as I hope I've demonstrated, but it has changed our behaviour. And the change that we are seeing, where it is taking place, is stuff that's not new, but has simply been pushed faster by COVID-19. It's revealed those trends and accelerated them, but they're not new trends. They were already there. They were, I'm afraid, for those of you who really like newness. And one of the problems is that we're often spotting change that just simply isn't there at all. We see a pattern of events, and we then tell ourselves a story about why it's happened. And finally, I'll just say overall then, when you're thinking about the world, change, I think, probably is overrated. And if you focus on understanding human values, which in research we should be able to do, if you focus on human values, you will finally really understand people. And it's when they change, which is much slower, that we might avoid our complete obsession with new. Thank you very much.